In the quiet town of Hexham, Northumberland, England, a tragedy in 1957 would set the stage for one of the most haunting and perplexing cases of supposed reincarnation ever recorded. John and Florence Pollock were a devout Catholic couple raising their two daughters, Joanna and Jacqueline, in a peaceful suburban life. The girls were exceptionally close, with a bond that seemed to go beyond sisterhood. Joanna, the elder at 11, often played a protective and motherly role over Jacqueline, who was 6. They shared everything: dolls, clothes, even imaginative games, and their parents often remarked how inseparable they were. However, fate struck a cruel blow when, on May 7, 1957, as the girls were walking to church with a friend, a distraught woman who had lost custody of her children deliberately struck them with her car, killing all three instantly. The Pollocks were devastated. Florence plunged into a deep depression, while John clung to his spiritual belief that the girls would return in some form. He began to entertain the idea of reincarnation, a belief not commonly accepted in their religious circles. John became convinced that his daughters would be reborn. Florence, initially horrified by his insistence, gradually softened as time passed, especially after becoming pregnant again. Doctors believed she was carrying one child, but to everyone's surprise, on October 4, 1958, Florence gave birth to identical twin girls, whom they named Jennifer and Gillian. Though identical twins technically come from a single egg and share the same genetic code, the parents began to notice subtle physical differences between the two. Most striking was that Jennifer had a birthmark on her waist that exactly matched a mark Jacqueline had, and another on her forehead that mirrored a scar Jacqueline had acquired in a bicycle accident. Gillian, meanwhile, bore no such marks. The family viewed these signs as more than coincidence. As the twins grew, things became even stranger. From a very early age, Jennifer and Gillian began requesting toys that had belonged to their deceased sisters without having ever been told about them. They named the dolls correctly, identified whose was whose, and showed a possessive attachment to items that had been boxed away after the accident. At just 3 years old, the twins were taken to Hexham for the first time since their birth. While walking through the town, they pointed out landmarks they had never seen before with eerie familiarity. They identified their sister's old school and playground, and even asked to go to a park that had been a favorite spot for Joanna and Jacqueline. The most unsettling moment came when they passed by a parked car and the girls became visibly frightened. Clutching each other, they cried out that the car was coming to get them, a reaction disturbingly reminiscent of the accident that killed their sisters. John and Florence were initially cautious in interpreting these incidents, not wanting to read too much into them. But the accumulation of details became too overwhelming to dismiss. The twins would act out scenarios related to their sisters' lives and deaths in their playtime, reenacting the accident scene without ever having been told the specifics. They also seemed to display personalities that aligned closely with their deceased siblings. Gillian was more mature and nurturing like Joanna, while Jennifer was more dependent and sensitive like Jacqueline. Their preferences for food, games, and even their walking styles matched those of the older girls, as confirmed by family members and friends who had known Joanna and Jacqueline well. One especially compelling account involved a set of toy animals that had been stored away since the death of the older girls. When the twins were old enough to play with them, they immediately gave them the exact names that Joanna and Jacqueline had used, names that had never been repeated or spoken aloud since the tragedy. Even Florence, who had resisted her husband's belief in reincarnation for years, began to consider the possibility that something truly supernatural was occurring. Adding to the mystery was the fact that the twins' memories of the lives of Joanna and Jacqueline seemed to fade as they got older. By age 7 or 8, most of the specific recollections had disappeared, and the girls grew up to lead normal lives. This fading memory is consistent with many other alleged cases of reincarnation, which often show a child retaining vivid past life memories until the age of around 7, after which they begin to forget. The Pollock Twins case gained international attention when it was investigated by Dr. Ian Stevenson, a Canadian-born psychiatrist and researcher who spent decades studying children who claimed to remember previous lives. Stevenson documented over 2,500 cases across various cultures, but he considered the Pollock twins one of the strongest examples from the Western world. He visited the family, conducted interviews, and cross-referenced the twins' statements with historical facts about Joanna and Jacqueline. While he could not claim definitive proof, Stevenson noted that the case met many of the criteria he used to evaluate past life memories, including verified statements, physical marks corresponding with past injuries, and behavioral similarities. What made the case particularly challenging to dismiss was the age of the girls when they began demonstrating these traits. Too young to be influenced by suggestion or familial pressure, the twins exhibited behaviors that seemed to emerge spontaneously and without any prompting. Skeptics have offered alternative explanations. Some argue that the parents, especially John, may have subconsciously encouraged the girls to behave in certain ways or projected their desires onto them. Others suggest that the twins could have picked up on cues from conversations or emotional atmospheres in the household, even if they were not explicitly told about their sisters. However, even critics admit that some of the details like the birthmarks, the naming of the toys, and the fearful reaction to the car are difficult to explain through conventional psychological mechanisms. The possibility of cryptomnesia, where forgotten memories resurface unconsciously, has also been considered, though it typically requires prior exposure to the information, which the Pollock twins reportedly lacked. In any case, the Pollock family never tried to sensationalize their story. They lived a relatively private life and were often hesitant to speak about the case publicly. Their cooperation with Dr. Stevenson was motivated not by fame or fortune, but by a sincere desire to understand what had happened to their family. The twins themselves have rarely spoken about their early memories in adulthood, and their recollections of their childhood claims are vague at best. This natural fading of memory, while consistent with other reincarnation cases, also frustrates those seeking a definitive answer. Still, the evidence compiled remains a central case study in the field of reincarnation research, continuing to spark debates among scientists, psychologists, and spiritual thinkers. As Jennifer and Gillian Pollock grew older, their behaviors and personalities began to mirror those of their deceased sisters in ways that defied explanation. Observers, including family friends and even researchers, noted how the twins seemed to carry over traits, fears, and habits that should have been impossible for them to have developed naturally. From their earliest days, they began to exhibit preferences and mannerisms eerily identical to those of Joanna and Jacqueline, despite never having met them or being told in detail about their lives. Florence and John were careful not to speak of the dead children in front of the twins, determined to shield them from the overwhelming grief that had enveloped the family. And yet, Jennifer and Gillian would ask questions or make comments that suggested a far deeper awareness of their older sister's experiences. One example often cited is how the twins instinctively knew the layout of a house they had never been to before but which had been familiar to Joanna and Jacqueline. During a family visit to an area they hadn't returned to since the accident, the girls led the way confidently, turning corners and entering rooms as though they had spent years there. The unnerving nature of such events could not be easily dismissed as childhood imagination or coincidence. Florence, initially a skeptic, found herself more disturbed than comforted by the unfolding similarities. She worried about the emotional toll it would take on the twins and whether their future identities would be shaped or overshadowed by the past. The emotional dynamic between the twins also reflected that of their late sisters. Gillian, like Joanna, was more assertive, independent, and protective. Jennifer, like Jacqueline, was more reserved and anxious, often deferring to her sister. This alignment of temperament was not just occasional but consistent throughout their early years, manifesting in how they responded to new people, approached challenges, or engaged in play. Even their vocabulary included words and phrases their parents associated specifically with Joanna and Jacqueline, phrases they believed had not been used or taught since the older girls had died. One particular moment stood out. Jennifer once pointed to a birthmark on her forehead and said she got it when she fell on a bucket. Jacqueline, the sister she was said to resemble, had in fact received a scar in precisely that place from falling on a bucket before she died. These instances, though anecdotal, accumulated rapidly. It wasn't just one or two isolated comments, it was a steady stream of behaviors and knowledge that seemingly came from nowhere. The girls' games often involved themes of death or being hit by a car, even before they were old enough to grasp the concept of what had happened to Joanna and Jacqueline. They reenacted scenarios uncannily similar to the tragic accident, using dolls and figurines, without any prior information provided to them. Their play appeared to serve as a subconscious reliving or processing of a trauma they should not have known about. These expressions grew increasingly frequent between the ages of 3 and 5, and then, just as curiously, began to fade as they approached the age of 7. Another striking component of the case was how the twins' fears mirrored those of the deceased girls. Jennifer was particularly terrified of cars, often clinging to Florence when one passed by or insisting they cross the street only when no vehicles were in sight. This was especially peculiar because the twins had never experienced any traumatic event involving cars. The fear seemed irrational and yet deeply ingrained, as if rooted in a memory or association beyond their present lives. Additionally, Jennifer's aversion to certain foods, her mannerisms while walking, and even the way she held a pencil or cradled her dolls all had specific parallels to Jacqueline, which friends and relatives of the family confirmed independently. As the twins entered school, further anomalies appeared. Teachers noted their advanced reading skills and social adaptability, traits associated with Joanna, who had been academically strong and well-liked. The educators, unaware of the family's past, remarked on how precocious the twins were, particularly Gillian. Even within the classroom, the sisters often took on roles that mimicked those their older siblings had played in their own social environments. Gillian acted like a leader, guiding and supporting Jennifer through new situations, almost as though an unconscious script from the past was being played out again. John Pollock, who had long believed in reincarnation, maintained extensive journals chronicling these behaviors. He kept meticulous records, noting each moment that suggested a carryover from the past. He believed the twins' existence was a divine answer to his prayers, a form of spiritual restitution for the tragedy they had suffered. Florence, although more hesitant, began to accept that the evidence was too overwhelming to be ignored. They approached the events not with sensationalism but with genuine bewilderment and reflection. They did not seek publicity or media attention, their goal was simply to understand what was happening to their children. The interest of Dr. Ian Stevenson brought a scientific lens to the unfolding mystery. A respected psychiatrist and researcher from the University of Virginia, Stevenson had compiled a vast database of children who claimed to remember past lives. When he learned about the Pollock case, he was immediately intrigued by its richness of detail and the credibility of the parents. Stevenson conducted interviews, gathered testimonies, and attempted to identify any possible external influence that could explain the twins' knowledge. His conclusion was not that reincarnation had been definitively proven, but that the Pollock case was among the most compelling examples of unexplained memory transference he had encountered. The precision of the girls' memories, the behavioral consistencies, and the physical birthmarks made the case difficult to explain through conventional psychology. Critics of the case argued that the parents could have, even unintentionally, influenced the girls through subtle cues or by conveying information without realizing it. They suggested that Jennifer and Gillian might have absorbed details through overheard conversations or emotional resonance. But this theory failed to account for the sheer depth and specificity of the knowledge the girls displayed, particularly at ages when language development was still forming. The possibility that their minds could construct detailed replicas of past lives from fragments of ambient family grief seemed unlikely to many who studied the case. Over time, as with many alleged reincarnation cases, the memories began to fade. By the time the twins reached adolescence, their connection to Joanna and Jacqueline's experiences seemed to dissolve into the fog of childhood. They no longer recalled the strange memories, nor did they continue the same patterns of speech or behavior. This gradual disappearance of memory is a pattern often seen in reincarnation cases and adds another layer of complexity. While skeptics might see it as evidence that the memories were false or imaginary, others interpret it as part of the process of the soul fully integrating into its current life. Whatever the interpretation, the twins' development into adulthood was largely normal, and they reportedly had no further experiences that connected them to their sisters' lives. They went on to live quietly, and by all accounts, grew into individuals with their own distinct identities, despite the profound and mysterious beginning to their story. The story of the Pollock twins became a focal point not only for spiritual believers but also for psychologists, neuroscientists, and skeptics who sought to understand what could cause such an uncanny replication of past lives in children with no logical access to the information they seemed to know. Among the most confounding aspects of the case is that even after years of careful scrutiny, no scientific or psychological framework has been able to fully explain the phenomena exhibited by Jennifer and Gillian. While many past life claims have been easily debunked due to inconsistencies or external influences, the Pollock case stands out because of the specific alignment of memories, behaviors, physical traits, and familial dynamics that echo the lives of the deceased sisters with unsettling precision. From a scientific standpoint, the first layer of analysis often centers on the possibility of environmental conditioning or subconscious reinforcement. The idea is that children absorb more from their surroundings than adults might realize. In a family grieving the loss of two young daughters, even unspoken emotional cues, fragments of conversations, or visual clues like photographs could implant notions into young, impressionable minds. However, in the case of Jennifer and Gillian, several obstacles challenge this hypothesis. For one, their parents consciously avoided discussing the tragedy around them. Florence in particular was adamant that the twins should not be raised under the shadow of their deceased siblings. Most of the deceased girls' toys and belongings were packed away before the twins were born, and the family moved to a different part of the country in an effort to start fresh. Despite this, the twins seemed to access specific information about people, places, and experiences that had never been reintroduced in their presence, which poses serious challenges to conventional environmental influence theories. Psychological explanations have also ventured into the realm of shared familial grief, suggesting that the parents, especially John, who firmly believed in reincarnation, may have unconsciously transmitted expectations or beliefs that subtly shaped the girls' identities. But this doesn't fully explain how the twins, before the age of 5, were able to recount names, incidents, and locations with accuracy that seemed far beyond even the potential of suggestion. When tested or questioned by neutral parties, such as friends of the family or investigators like Dr. Ian Stevenson, the girls were able to provide information that hadn't been disclosed to them in any obvious way. The specific naming of dolls, identification of landmarks in Hexham, and recognition of people the twins had never formally met stand out as data points that continue to defy simple answers. Another explanation explored by skeptics is that the twins were not actually recalling past lives but were exhibiting signs of cryptomnesia or confabulation. These are psychological phenomena where the brain retrieves information stored deep in memory, perhaps absorbed passively or unconsciously, and reinterprets it as original thought or personal experience. While cryptomnesia is a known cognitive glitch that can account for some cases of false memory, it typically arises from prior exposure to the information in question. In the Pollock twins case, the claim is that the girls would have had no exposure whatsoever to the memories they demonstrated, especially considering their tender age and the efforts made by their parents to prevent any discussion of the deceased siblings around them. Moreover, birthmarks present another compelling element in the case. Jennifer was born with two unique markings that mimicked those found on Jacqueline, one birthmark on her waist that resembled a dark smudge Jacqueline had from birth, and a second on her forehead that closely resembled a scar Jacqueline had obtained in an accident shortly before her death. The appearance of these marks on an identical twin where the genetic material is theoretically the same as her sister Gillian, who bore no such marks, raised questions that genetics alone could not explain. Some researchers suggest that birthmarks linked to past life trauma have appeared in many other reincarnation cases studied globally, particularly by Dr. Stevenson, who compiled numerous examples of such phenomena in children from diverse cultural backgrounds. In many of these cases, the children recalled violent or traumatic deaths and had corresponding marks on their bodies. The cultural context of the Pollock case also adds an intriguing layer. Unlike many reincarnation stories that emerge from regions where belief in past lives is woven into the societal fabric such as India or Southeast Asia, the Pollock family was from a Christian background in mid-20th century England, where the idea of reincarnation was far outside mainstream doctrine. This makes the emergence of the story less likely to be influenced by cultural suggestion or religious indoctrination. In fact, Florence initially resisted the idea entirely, viewing it as heretical and distressing. Her reluctance to accept the possibility lends some weight to the claim that what was happening to her daughters was not something she had cultivated or encouraged. Some theories drift into more metaphysical territory, suggesting that consciousness or memory might not be fully contained within the brain, but instead function as a kind of energy or pattern that can be imprinted onto another vessel. From this viewpoint, reincarnation is not so much a religious belief as a transference of informational patterns from one life to another, triggered by unresolved trauma, emotional bonds, or even intentions such as John's intense belief that his daughters would return. While such ideas remain speculative and controversial within the scientific community, they offer frameworks that attempt to reconcile the observable anomalies in the Pollock case with theories of mind and consciousness that are not yet fully understood. The waning of the twins' memories as they aged also raises important questions. Why would the clarity of these memories diminish around the same age they began school and became more socially engaged with their present life? In many reincarnation cases studied globally, the pattern is similar: strong recollections from around age 2 to 7, which then fade as the child assimilates into their current identity. This transition suggests that whatever mechanism might be responsible, whether cognitive, spiritual, or energetic, it has a limited window during which past life memories are accessible. In Jennifer and Gillian's case, the gradual disappearance of their connection to Joanna and Jacqueline may support this broader pattern and add credibility to the phenomenon for those who study it seriously. Despite years of debate, no consensus has been reached. Those who believe in reincarnation see the Pollock twins as one of the most persuasive examples in the Western world, particularly because of the documented evidence, the corroborated statements, and the careful observations made by an investigator of Stevenson's caliber. Skeptics, however, continue to assert that until a mechanism for reincarnation can be empirically demonstrated or scientifically validated, all such stories must be viewed with caution. Yet even they often admit that the Pollock case is exceptionally difficult to dismiss entirely. It does not follow the usual patterns of deception, misremembering, or parental manipulation. Instead, it presents an enduring mystery that challenges assumptions about memory, identity, and the boundaries of human experience. As the twins moved beyond childhood and their connection to the past life faded, the case slowly drifted into the realm of folklore, preserved by researchers, archived interviews, and the quiet recollections of a family that never asked for attention. What remains is a case that continues to provoke curiosity, unsettle skeptics, and embolden those who believe that the soul or something like it may indeed survive death and return in ways we are only beginning to comprehend.